I'm Helen Foray. Last week, Miami-Dade County Mayor Carlos Gimenez' $6.8 billion budget was approved, but not unanimously. The two no votes came from Commissioners Juan Carlos Zapata and Javier Suarez. Earlier this month, Commissioner Suarez was a guest on our program and took a few swipes at Mayor Gimenez regarding his handling of transportation in the county. Joining me to discuss the budget, transportation, and more, we welcome Miami-Dade County Mayor Carlos Gimenez. Mayor, good to have you back at the table.
It's great to be back, Helen.
So, first of all, the $6.8 billion budget covers a lot of issues, expanded hours of county libraries. We have the deployment of a second fireboat in Biscayne Bay. There's a boost in hiring at jails and so much more. Were you surprised that this year, the first time in many years, it was a rather seamless budget process? No,
I wasn't. When I became the mayor, it was a tough economic time, and we had to tighten our belts. And so I told our budget folks, this is what we're going to do. We are going to tighten our belts, and eventually things are going to get better. And when they get better, then we can loosen up a little bit. And so, no, I wasn't surprised that this year it came out that way. I kind of, saw that the market was turning, that the housing market had turned around, and that our property values were going to go up. And so we were very conservative in our estimates. And so if we had just hit our estimates, everything would have been fine. But since we went above, then we were able to enhance services with that. And so that's what happened. So the things I thought were going to happen actually happen. I think next year again we're going to be in roughly the same position. We again have very conservative estimates of property tax value or property value growth. If that is met, then we're going to be fine. If that's exceeded, then we're going to have additional revenue then either to give back to the people or to enhance services, and it really is going to depend on the situation when we reach it next year.
When you say that the economy is better for the county, that this provides you the opportunity to loosen up, some would say, well, that just means he's really just caving into union demands.
No, actually, no. But what I mean loosen up is that there are some things that we had cut back in the past. And so we had 100 vacancies of police officers. That these are positions that have been there. We're going to fill them now. So we'll have 100 police officers more on the street. We did have a Department of Justice consent decree that basically kind of forces us into hiring more corrections officers. We have a lot of overtime, so we want to increase that force by about 200 in order to reduce overtime, but also to comply with the consent decree from the Justice Department. That was an unanticipated expense of about $10 million. Library hours, we wanted to expand them, get them back. We actually, before my administration, there never was libraries that were open 7 days a week. We actually this year had libraries open 7 days a week, our 5 regional, but we wanted to expand the branch libraries to 6 days a week. So we're going to start that process. 10
Were
of the
you
libraries.
Surprised?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't help but think that you have to have been surprised by the public outcry regarding the library issue.
No, I don't think so. Look, I mean, we had to take very hard positions in the times when the money wasn't there, and so when you do that, you have to prioritize. So what is our priority? Well, number one priority is we got to have water and sewer. That's number one, because we can't have a civilization without it, and so that's number one. And so that's kind of taken care of. Then you got to go to public safety, and then we have to assure that we run a good public safety departments and that our safety is assured. And so as you start to go down the list, remember libraries were also a separate taxing district, so they have their own kind of funds. And so we had to take some of that millage and then shift it over to fire in order to keep fire going. And then that adversely affected the libraries. But we put some millage back to libraries, and now the libraries are getting more revenue. That's why we're able to open 10 of those branches 6 days a week. We also have more money for materials for libraries. And so, yeah, we hear the public. That's important. But you got to prioritize, as an administrator.
And understood, but it's such an important part of the public square of democracy. It's such a basic component, and we put such an emphasis on the importance of education that library. I mean, Granted, I'm pretty pro-library person myself.
No, I know.
But it's
So am I. I love libraries. It's just a matter of prioritization. And at the end of the day, none of the things that were cut in the past weren't things that I thought were important. It's just how do you where do they stand in line, and what do you really have to make sure that you have to prioritize? And public safety was something that we had to prioritize. Public transportation was something we had to prioritize. The things that get people to and from work. And the libraries were further down the line. Now we're able to, again, put money back into the libraries, and we're going to be expanding those hours again, and materials. And so we expect to do that again next year and get that back to where we really want to be, which is having the best library system in the country. So, but it's, again, all of that is a question of how much do you have and how much can you spend. And so unlike the federal government, we can't run a budget deficit, and I will not run a budget deficit because I am a fiscal conservative, and so, and I won't raise taxes either. And so, at a time when the economy was bad, I think it's a bad thing to raise taxes. Actually, we lowered taxes, and so, the economy has rebounded. Our property tax basis has rebounded. We had contracts which kept our costs, in line. And with that, now we are able to now look at new revenue and see how we can expand services.
You've had criticisms from two commissioners, Commissioner Juan Carlos Zapata, who in the Miami Herald was quoted in an article that came out regarding the budget after the budget vote by Doug Hanks and Michael Vasquez. And Juan Carlos Zapata said, he was one of the two no votes, he said, quote, "You said you were a fiscal conservative. I consider myself a fiscal conservative. I don't think this is a fiscally conservative budget." What's that about?
Oh, yeah, but he says that, but then he wants me to spend more money in UMSA. And so you talk
UMSA,
which is the unincorporated areas. And so there are people
in his district.
Yeah, there's a saying, everybody wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to die. Okay, and apparently Commissioner Sabato wants to go to heaven, but he doesn't want to die because what he wants to do is he wants to spend more money, open up new things in the unincorporated area in his district, which takes more money. But then he doesn't, want to spend the money. So I mean, you got to make up your mind what it is that you want to do. Again, look, in any budget, you're going to be criticized about something. Somebody doesn't think you put enough into that, or some of the people who put too much into something, and it's a balancing act. And so I have commissioners that want to raise taxes, and I want to have commissioners that want to lower taxes. Okay, and so there is a balancing act to this. I think the good news is that 11 commissioners voted on the budget. The budget discussion was very brief in terms of substance. It was probably 99.9% of the budget as proposed was passed. We talked to our commissioners, says, what are the things that you want in your districts? And actually, it's 100% of the things that was proposed at the end was actually passed, because in budgets before, the commissioners would actually take money from here, put it there, et cetera. None of that happened this time. So it's not a science. It's somewhat of an art. You're going to get criticized no matter what you do. We had a really great budget, and some people weren't happy with some of the things that we did, but that comes with the territory.
Commissioner Javier Suarez had some ads that came out during the late August, first week of September, where he was criticizing your politics or your policies regarding transportation. And he also came on Issues as a guest a couple of weeks ago, and he was very critical of the commingling of transportation funds with the general funds, which he says is outrageous given the transportation congestion, lack of rapid or mass transit that we have.
Sure.
Nobody can deny transportation is literally at a standstill.
Right.
Many hours of the day, too many hours of the day in Miami-Dade County. What about the commingling of funds? Should we be doing that?
Well, I voted against it when I was a commissioner, but it was the funds were operational. PTP money was used for operations, and I was voting against it. It was supposed to be used for capital. I voted against it some years ago. It was incorporated in, and now, and when I look at it as the mayor, if you try to rip that out now, you have about $128 million that is used for operations. Some of it, which is new operations, which is actually valid use of the PTP. Some of it, PTP is it's a half cent. Okay, basically the public transportation, people's transportation plan, which is the half cent. And so that half-cent was supposed to be used for new and expanded service and new rail, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I knew right away when I became a commissioner back in '04, after it had passed 2 years earlier, that a lot of it had been overpromised. There was no way we could get 8 new Metro Rail lines out of the half-cent. We couldn't do it because these things are hyper expensive, especially Metro Rail. $250 million a mile to build, just to build. All right. So later on, they just, the commission and sided with the administration to go ahead and allow this half-cent to be used for some of the ongoing operations of transit. There's about $128 million that's used for ongoing operations of transit right now. If you rip that out right now, all right, yes, well, I agree that needs to be done. You can't do it in 1 year. And so our plan is to actually wean us off, okay, that half-cent, and by 5 years we'll be down to about $28 million instead of the 128. So we'll put $100 million back into the original, what it was originally intended to. If we do it now, boom, and take $128 million, you have to do one of like 3 things. Either you have to increase fares to $10, which I don't think anybody wants to do, or you have to increase taxes by about $128 million, which I don't think anybody wants to do, or you have to decrease services by about $128 million, which means you're going to be stranding, thousands of people that rely on public transportation now. And so, I look at it at things, of reality, not just in terms of it sounds good. And though I may have voted against it, and we probably, the administration should have never gotten into it, the fact is we're into it, and we can't get out of it in a single stroke. We have to work our way out of it, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
There's a difference between rapid transit and mass transit. A train can move a large number of people at one time and have a few stops. But when you do rapid transit, people are assuming it's like the People Mover in the Brickell area or Metro Rail, where you're going to have a number of stops.
Right.
There's a lot of conversation going on about All Aboard Florida and what All Aboard Florida hopes to accomplish. Is that a good use of public dollars? Is that a good solution for our public transportation problems?
Well, I think so. I mean, you have if we were to replicate the line, the FEC line that the All Aboard Florida station will ultimately use, my hope, you're talking a couple $1 billion, and so that's a couple $1 billion that's being done by the private sector. That eventually, I want to see Tri-Rail get on, and then what that means is that you can go from downtown Miami to Aventura, maybe a couple of more stops down the way, and go directly into downtown Miami. Okay, so and all the way by the way, right into downtown West Palm Beach, and so that's a line that we've been looking for here for years. The number 2 commuting. The number 2 commuting, I guess, direction or pattern comes from the northeast into downtown. The number 1 actually flows from, it's obvious, flows from Kendall, Coral Gables into downtown.
West to east.
Yeah, exactly. West to east, and then back, and then back, and then. But the number 2 is actually from the northeast in that northeast corridor. So we're going to be able to, for a very relatively inexpensive way, actually activate a line which is privately owned right now, and that can be we can co-use with All Aboard Florida. I think it makes a lot of sense, and so and it's almost like somebody already, all right, here it's done. Here, all you got to do is put your trains on there, and now we have commuter rail in a line which you really want to have at a significantly reduced price. I think that only makes sense.
So that works for connecting south, going north-south, south-north. What about east-west? What is the answer there?
Well, the answer there will have to be initially probably some kind of bus rapid transit, which is easy. It's a lot easier to put in place. I know Commissioner Bovo is looking at the CSX line that runs just north of the 836. And that's a viable alternative. Again, it's an existing infrastructure. It's a rail line. You don't have to invest that much money into doing it. It already, basically, you don't have to acquire the right of way and all. So that's one of the things we need to study. But eventually, we're going to have to get down to Kendall. And one of the priorities for me from my next term would be, that's a priority now in the next term, is that, okay, at least identify it, fund it, and get it going, all right? Because nothing that we do today is going to be done by tomorrow. It's going to take 3, 4, 5 years. And so the things that we're doing today are going to be done for our children and our grandchildren. Yeah, we will reap the benefits of it 5 or 6 years down the road, but it's really to make Miami-Dade County a much more livable place for us, our children, and our grandchildren.
It's hard to be livable when it becomes so unaffordable.
Mm-hmm.
Some people think that MDX has made transit unaffordable. What do you think?
Well, the problem with MDX was, I believe, look, there's no free lunch. You have to pay for these projects, and so people think, well, I pay taxes. Your taxes really don't go for really road projects. Outside of public works, what Miami-Dade County does. The expressways and the expressway authorities in the past used to use a lot of the gas tax, and gas taxes, the revenues are actually coming down. And so there's got to be another source, and the source is user fees. The problem with MDX is that they're charging ahead of time. I wouldn't mind so much paying for a quarter after the thing is built, but they're asking you to pay ahead of time for projects that are going to be built. And I believe that's where MDX, I think missed the boat. And also, if MDX is actually making more money, I think it should be refunded. Not refunded by having to do some kind of fill out some paperwork to get in some kind of club or whatever. But actually, if that's the case, then lower your tolls. Lower the tolls to exactly what it is that you need to have in order to have these new projects. The 836, 826 interchange, once it's done, I think is going to be a tremendous help. And so for me personally, I'm willing to pay a little bit more as long as I get some kind of service out of it. But I'm not willing to pay more if I'm stuck in the same traffic jam. What we have to do in Miami-Dade County is give options. You can, and believe me, even if we have the greatest transit system in the world, 90% of our people are still going to be in a car. All right, so what we're focusing on right now is, all right, 95% of our people, 97% of our people are in cars right now. While we may be focusing on transit solutions for the future, what do we have to do right now to make that experience better? And so I've tasked our new transportation director to, all right, I want the 10 most used commuting corridors, and I want to make sure that the signalization system in those, at least in those initially, is is state of the art. It's smart, and so that commute at least can be faster as we turn around and as we start to plan for expanding our transit system around Miami-Dade.
Some people would argue that even if you expand public transportation, it's not going to really get used because we are such a spread out county. It's not just Miami-Dade County. The same thing occurs with Broward and Palm Beach. So that you can, right now we have 1.5% to maybe 3% people who are using public transportation. But at the end of the day, it makes it so very difficult when you live far south and you have to work far east.
Right. Well, the problem is the first mile and the last mile. And what I mean by the first mile and the last mile is you have to get into a car to go to a place where there's public transportation. Then when you get off the public transportation, then you got to get a car to go to your work or your final destination. That's the first and the last mile. And when I talk about options, that's why I'm so big on the new application-based technology for like Uber and Lyft and all that. Our kids are using it. They're using it not only for the first and last mile, but they're using it for their transportation needs, even though it's illegal right now in Miami-Dade. I want to make it legal. I want to bring Miami-Dade County into the 21st century. I want to bring our taxis into the 21st century because that is a solution. If you have that, if that's viable and you know that you can pick up a phone and you can say, okay, I need to go 2 miles over there. You may not want to take your car all the way in once we establish good public transportation from the outlying areas. Once we establish a good public transportation, let's say from Kendall to downtown, Kendall to Doral, you still have that problem when you get to Doral Station. All right, I work now at Channel 4 or 7 or some warehouse. How do I go from that station and get to my job? That's the first and the last mile. So we're looking at privately run companies that may be able to pick up a number of people where they're left off and take them to their job or take them to their house. That's how you get more people to use public transportation.
MDX needs the additional funds that they're charging or the high tolls that they charge. Because they use that money for bonding to be able to expand projects?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. That's the problem that I had with them, is that what they're doing is they're paying ahead of time. There's two ways you can do this. You can bond out, and then you can use capitalized interest, and then at the end, once it's all done, then you actually then toll the area that you just that was completed, and then that pays, you know, in arrears. What MDX does, it actually saves a little bit of money at the end, but it really upsets people in the beginning, is that they do that ahead of time. They actually charge ahead of time. There are a couple of projects that haven't even started that they're already being charged for right now. The good news about that, you know, there's the double-edged sword. You're being charged for something you're not seeing, but at the end of the day, it's actually you actually get to pay off that debt, you know, sooner, because you're not using capitalized interest. You know, that's the problem. It's a perceptional problem, and people are saying, "Wait a minute, you're charging me for all this stuff. I'm not seeing any relief." They have the 57th Avenue to 17th Avenue new expansion of the 836, which is really needed. People are already paying for that, and they also have from the 17th Avenue to the MacArthur. People are already paying for that too. All right, but those projects haven't even started. All right, so you're still bogged up in the same. You still have the same traffic jams, and you're paying more, but you're not seeing anything, you know, end result, and you won't see that for some years to come.
Two issues I want to get in here. Housing, rising housing cost, which makes it almost impossible for families to be able to sustain, especially young families trying to get a first mortgage, and or even families who own their homes and want to sell and move somewhere else. Housing's a big issue, and climate change. Let's start just brief. Miami Herald last week did a big article, and as well did the Sun Sentinel, regarding the outrageous housing market. And we had talked before the show started about an apartment that sold for $67 million or something.
$60 million.
$60 million. And that, of course, is
a little bit beyond our range, I think.
High end of the scale.
Yeah.
But housing has become relatively unaffordable for too big a number of Miami-Dade County folks. Adds to traffic congestion. Denver, and we look at Denver as a model to emulate when it comes to transportation, they dealt with transportation and housing simultaneously.
Right.
When we look at housing here, the further away you are from the city, the more affordable housing
That's right.
is.
That's correct.
And so it creates a huge transportation problem.
That's right.
Don't we need to look at housing and transportation together?
You do, but you know, if you look at it, take a look at New York. You know, the housing prices in Manhattan are out through the roof, and so it's unaffordable for most of the people that work in Manhattan. They have to come from outside. That may be happening also in Miami-Dade. There are very, you know, desirable areas of Miami-Dade, Miami Beach, you know, downtown Aventura, that, you know, because it's desirable, it's a market-driven economy. Therefore, it's supply and demand, and so the pricing will go up. We have to be cognizant of that as we make decisions of where we want to build our public housing, or where we want assisted housing, where we want affordable housing. We have land in Miami-Dade County. We don't use that land for, you know, luxury condominiums. We use it for affordable housing, and we incentivize the developers by giving them the free land or very subsidized land. It's critical, because of what's happening, that we do create a mass transit system out to those outlying areas so that they can get to work. But more importantly, also, we have to find, you know, good paying jobs. And so, you know, the thing that the focus of my administration is jobs, creation of jobs, all kinds of jobs, and bringing and diversifying our economy and increasing, you know, basically having better paying jobs here in Miami-Dade County, more opportunity for our residents and more opportunity for our kids and grandchildren. And so that's my focus. It's about jobs, bringing new jobs, making us a tech center, making us an innovation center, making us, you know, putting money in like Venture Hive, which is an incubator, you know, technology incubator. All those things are really geared to, at the end of the day, in order for you to have an affordable house, whatever, you have to have a good job. All right, and so that's the focus of my administration is, all right, let's incentivize more job creation here, better job creation here in Miami-Dade County.
Climate change, inescapable, especially as Pope Francis is here talking about a number of issues, including climate change. But we are, you know, probably, ground zero when it comes to climate change and rising water. $300,000 were put into the budget to deal with climate change. What is that going to go to, and how do we handle climate change?
We don't know yet. And so, when people clamor for a lot of money for climate change and for sea level rise, even if I had $1 billion, I wouldn't know how to do what to do with it, because we don't have the answer yet. We have two problems in Miami-Dade County. The water just won't lap over. The water will come from underneath because we have porous limestone. That's our bedrock is not solid. And so, while the Netherlands have been able to build dikes, around their country and basically they're below sea level and kept the ocean out, we can't do that because we have this porous limestone that comes underneath. So we don't know yet what the solution is. It's going to be some kind of an engineering solution. It's going to be some kind of, one of the things that I like about, and I'm very committed to the restoration of our beaches, is for economic development reasons, but also to give us more of a barrier for sea level rise. The $300,000 is to get some engineering help to start looking at the ways that we can mitigate sea level rise in the future. I've spoken to the president of the University of Miami, the new, Dr. Frank, which I think, by the way, is a lovely person. I think he's going to be great for the university. And I basically, challenged him. I said, look, we are ground zero for sea level rise. You should be the institution people look for to how do you mitigate sea level rise, not only in Miami but around the world, and be the preeminent, university studying the issue and how to mitigate it, how to adapt to it. Because at the end of the day, we're going to have to adapt to it. But one thing, Helen, and I want to make sure people understand it, we're not moving. The demise of Miami is totally premature. We are Miamians. We're going to stay right here. We love it where we are, and we will adapt and we'll mitigate the effects of sea level rise, in the future.
Mayor Carlos Gimenez, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Seamless budget process.
No, I wasn't. When I became the mayor, it was a tough economic time, and we had to tighten our belts. And so I told our budget folks, this is what we're going to do. We are going to tighten our belts, and eventually things are going to get better. And when they get better, then we can loosen up a little bit. And so, no, I wasn't surprised that this year it came out that way. I kind of, saw that the market was turning, that the housing market had turned around, and that our property values were going to go up. And so we were very conservative in our estimates. And so if we had just hit our estimates, everything would have been fine. But since we went above, then we were able to enhance services with that. And so that's what happened. So the things I thought were going to happen actually happened. I think next year, again, we're going to be in roughly the same position. We, again, have very conservative estimates of property tax value or Prop Justice Department. That was an unanticipated expense of about $10 million. Library hours, we wanted to expand them, get them back. We actually, before my administration, there never was libraries that were open 7 days a week. We actually this year had libraries open 7 days a week, our 5 regional. But we wanted to expand the branch libraries to 6 days a week. So we're going to start that process, 10
Were
of the
you
libraries.
surprised?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't help but think that you have to have been surprised by the public outcry regarding the library issue.
No, I don't think so. Look, I mean, we had to take very hard positions in the times when the money wasn't there. And so when you do that, you have to prioritize. So what is our priority? Well, number one priority is we got to have water and sewer. That's number one, because we can't have a civilization without it. And so that's number one. And so that's kind of taken care of. Then you got to go to public safety, and then we have to assure that property value growth. If that is met, then we're going to be fine. If that's exceeded, then we're going to have additional revenue then either to give back to the people or to enhance services, and it really is going to depend on the situation when we reach it next year.
When you say that the economy is better for the county, that this provides you the opportunity to loosen up, some would say, well, that just means he's really just caving into union demands.
No, actually, no. But what I mean loosen up is that there are some things that we had cut back in the past. And so we had 100 vacancies of police officers. That these are positions that have been there. We're going to fill them now. So we'll have 100 police officers more on the street. We did have a Department of Justice consent decree that basically kind of forces us into hiring more corrections officers. We have a lot of overtime, so we want to increase that force by about 200 in order to reduce overtime, but also to comply with the consent decree from the just that we run a good public safety departments and that our safety is assured. And so as you start to go down the list, remember libraries were also a separate taxing district, so they have their own kind of funds. And so we had to take some of that millage and then shift it over to fire in order to keep fire, going. And then that adversely affected the libraries. But we put some millage back to libraries, and now the libraries are getting more revenue. That's why we're able to open 10 of those branches 6 days a week. We also have more money for materials for libraries. And so, yeah, we hear the public. That's important. But you got to prioritize, as an administrator.
And understood, but it's such an important part of the public square of democracy. It's such a basic component,
Right.
and we put such emphasis on the importance of education that library. I mean, granted, I'm pretty pro-library person. Hello, I'm Helen Foray. Last week, Miami-Dade County Mayor Carlos Gimenez' $6.8 billion budget was approved, but not unanimously. The two no votes came from Commissioners Juan Carlos Zapata and Javier Suarez. Earlier this month, Commissioner Suarez was a guest on our program and took a few swipes at Mayor Gimenez regarding his handling of transportation in the county. Joining me to discuss the budget, transportation, and more, we welcome Miami-Dade County Mayor Carlos Gimenez. Mayor, good to have you back at the table.
It's great to be back, Helen.
So, first of all, the $6.8 billion budget covers a lot of issues, expanded hours of county libraries. We have the deployment of a second fire boat in Biscayne Bay. There's a boost in hiring at jails and so much more. Were you surprised that this year, the first time in many years, it was a rather seamless